So I tweeted out if anybody's actually following us yet. Thing with the getting a new group up and going, you never know who's going to find you through what channels. So, how far is everybody coming from today? I'm actually Irvine myself.
Me as well. Irvine.
Irvine? Yeah, I just wasn't sure what kind of reach we get.
Huntington.
Huntington? Yeah. Excellent. Actually, how did you guys hear about the group? What was the channel that kind of got your attention?
Meetups.
The meetups? Okay.
I'm following you on Twitter.
Appreciate it. Followers always help. Yeah, so I suppose kind of quick introduction. I'm Kevin Marquette. I've been doing PowerShell for at least 10 years now. IT stuff for probably closer to 17. I recently moved to the area, I suppose beginning of the year. I can't say recently anymore, yeah. So it's 8 months ago.
Yeah, you've been here a long time.
Yeah. Anyways, and then David, he's also rocks at PowerShell. He's been stepped up to help me out.
Yeah, so I've been doing PowerShell since 2007. Really wanted to start getting more involved with the community, and I know Kevin's been involved, so our way of getting back is just super excited and happy that everybody came. You guys decided to spend the evening with us. It means a lot. Really does.
Yeah, so I'm trying to set up various channels for people to discover the group, like the meetup. That was an obvious one to, first stake in the ground that we're actually doing this group meeting. I do have a Twitter handle, like SoCalPowerShell is kind of how we're branding the group. There it is. So we've got a website set up, just very basic so far, but as we grow and have more content, we'll probably get it published on here. And then we've also got a Twitter handle under the same name for, I suppose, relaying and sharing information. I'll probably tweet quite a bit off my own account because I do blog quite a bit. I try to tie into the PowerShell community, so I'm Kevin Marquette, at Kevin Marquette on Twitter. I like to start these groups. This is the first inaugural meeting of this group here in Southern California. I did work with a user group in Austin before I came out here, so I was helping host and doing some presentations there. But this will be my first time actually leading or help leading a group with David. So any feedback through the process, like if there's better ways to communicate with you guys or things you'd like to see, definitely let us know. We're hoping to.
Or, yeah, if you guys want to present topics you guys like to share and you want to get up here in 45 minutes, we're more than happy for that as well.
Yeah, it's got a cool project. We'd love to have like local presentations when possible. We've got somebody. We'll look back on it, but we got Dave lined up to present next month.
Yep.
And then we're hoping to like a community call for like MVPs to maybe present to us. But if we can get some other bodies in to fill some slots, we're more than welcome to have people present. So that I like to start the group off with like a room full of introductions. So let's say you know who I am. I work here at Loan Depot. They were grateful enough to actually sponsor us with the room here. And I'll also mention the pizza was sponsored by Sapient Tools. They do like Sapient PowerShell Studio. So we got a little bit of sponsorship here, and we're grateful for those that are helping us out here. So you know who I am? You want to do the introductions?
Yeah, sure.
So who are you? Where are you from? And what have you done with PowerShell this month?
Okay. My name's Adrian Villanueva. I work in a auto insurance company out in Brea, California, but I live in Irvine. Next question was, what do I do?
Yeah, what have you done with
lately?
PowerShell this month or recently?
This month, so I usually live in the PowerCLI world. I'm a sysadmin over there and do a lot of VMware administration. So what I did today was create a commandlet or an advanced function for setting the boot delay for a VM.
Okay, it's a fun one.
I'm Andrew. I'm pretty new to the area. I just moved here at the end of May. I do a lot of Python mostly. Like I've done PowerShell for 2 or 3 years, but on a really basic level.
Okay.
So as my skills in other languages get better, I think they lag behind in PowerShell specifically. So yeah, I'm mostly here to learn more. What I've done in the last month, I mean, not too much that's anything other than like basic operations with like GitHub and running Python programs and
Okay.
things like that.
Well, thank you. Actually,
You busy right
you know
now?
these?
Yeah, I'm in the middle of.
All right. Yeah, he's working over here.
Oh,
So,
Yeah, my name's Ravi Singh, and what was the second question?
what have you done with PowerShell this month?
That's the second question. That
The
was
third one. Okay, where are you from?
yeah. Actually, I live in Carlsbad, like northern San Diego, and yeah, but it's just SoCal, so that's still part of it. And I'm actually working on the as in now support at the Jenkins integration, native integration with PowerShell now. And trying to do the whole release pipeline white paper that's in there.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Sounds like a fun project.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm actually in the middle because we still support like Windows servers 2008, 2008 R2 and 2016. So I'm trying to actually combine Test Kitchen with the multiple platforms, different like Windows Server R2, 2012 R2, 2016, together with deployment I'm trying to test. That's supposed to support all four.
Okay.
And then combining that with Jenkins in a way that would see all those suites of products and hit against it without having to do a complete new pipeline outside of Test Kitchen. Like combining the platforms and the suites within Test Kitchen with the pipelines I need in Jenkins and PowerShell. So.
That's fine.
Mike Takata. I also work here at Loan Depot. I mainly learn from Dave and Kevin. This month, I've pretty much just done little helper scripts for deployments for software stuff. Pretty basic stuff.
I'm Eric Phoenix. I just moved here from Denver. I work with the team here at Loan Depot also, mostly just learning their DSC and PowerShell stuff as well.
I'm Devin. I recently moved here from LA. I actually work in an insurance broker. I actually do a lot of marketing technically, so I'm not really employed in a place where I can use like PowerShell on a daily basis. I'm just trying to get a little more into it because I have a little more experience with Bash and Z Shell, so I understand that PowerShell has so many features that I don't understand. So I want to try to bring that into kind of out here every day, kind of understand a little bit more. So I'm not able to here to pick up where I can. So I brought my buddy David along.
Yeah. So David, I work at KPG, actually in IT audit.
Okay.
So I don't use some databases, but he suggested I come to meet us, so figured I'd come and just see what it's all about.
Michael DeJoy. I work at Loan Depot with David Kevin and a bunch of other people in the room. I'm originally from the East Coast. I've lived out here for the last 5 years. What I've done with PowerShell in the last month, outside of my day-to-day, is I've contributed to Jira PS, which is just the PowerShell module to interface with Jira. So it's source on GitHub.
Hey everybody, David again, SoCal born and raised. See this month, posted an article on how to work with IP addresses in PowerShell, and I submitted 2 pull requests into the PowerShell project. So hopefully this will be numbers 4 and 5 when they get closed out.
Just in time. Introduce yourself.
Where are you on?
Come on in.
We just got pizza and some water stuff.
I'm very nearby, work for Panasonic Avionics. Our production DB of Microsoft SQL Server in the past 5 years. I attended a training program for SQL DBS and PowerShell. They said that you can just start doing everything in PowerShell. That was a 4-day course, and I just came back complete. So I'm here to learn. See if I can do any of this scripting skills in my day-to-day work.
So I'm Travis Drake. I also work at Loan Depot. I moved here a month and a half ago from Seattle, Washington. Very, very big environmental shock difference between the two places. And I have a developer background, and Loan Depot hired me as sort of a developer perspective for what they're working on. So what have I done with PowerShell recently? Well, the thing that sticks out is really what I was working on today. Iterating through like JSON documents essentially, and making transforms here and there to basically convert legacy data formats to a newer format, and sort of mine some information out of that can be used to describe things. We use a metadata system here. It's hard to describe.
It always is.
That sounds like a deep rabbit hole.
With that, we'll give Wen. You want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Wen. I just joined the company 3 months. I was a programmer before on the Java, then Visual Basic until right now. You got switch to PowerShell. Basically, yeah, before I was a release engineer, still right now to work on the Elasticsearch stuff.
So I'm actually, I said I moved here at the beginning of the year, but actually I grew up in Nebraska, and I kind of took a short stint in Austin on my way out here. So, excuse me. So you'll see Loan Depot is a strong representation here. It's actually our DevOps team. All of us are actually on the DevOps team that are here from Loan Depot, and it's actually the great work that they were doing that kind of brought me out here. I've just seen them do some amazing stuff with DSC, and kind of felt like there's lots of material we could cover, even as sessions based on some work we've done. So hopefully we get a chance to present some of that stuff. All right. Well, with that, I'm going to and so my presentation today is everything you ever want to know about hash tables. And I like picking this topic because it really covers it. There's something in there for everybody, right? Like there's introductory things for people new to PowerShell. Like you'll learn that hash tables, as I explain what they are just a very common feature throughout the language. And as you grow with PowerShell, you'll find yourself using them in more and more complex ways. And there's even some really deep dive fun stuff that you kind of understand once you get a good grasp of what they are. So, with that, I don't have these published yet. I meant to toss these up on my GitHub page. That's generally where I host my presentations. And we have a GitHub page for the group now as well, so I'll probably actually pick these and read out over there once I get posted. So, before I talk about hash tables, I do need to just touch on arrays, right? Like the basic collections in PowerShell. And so if you're not familiar with it, like this here defines a collection of items. I've got about 5 or so, 6, 7 in there, different numbers. And by executing this line, right, I've basically created an array of these values. And if you work with them, there's ways of accessing elements within the array. So 0 is like the 0th element of the first one. It would tell me, if I actually run this now, you'll see all of these items, that are part of the array. But you can access each individual items by using this bracket accessor. So if the 0th one or the next one on the list, I can call to it directly. So if you have an index in the array, you can get your item. They're also able to iterate over them. So like here we're doing the classic array, this collection, passing to a for each, and for each item, I'm multiplying it by 2. Right? This is some common patterns that you'll see when you're working with arrays. And then setting values back in, if I just assign a value back to the element index 1, it gets saved there. So that's a quick dirty of getting stuff in and out of an array. And I draw this parallel because hash tables kind of build on that idea. We do arrays of strings just as easily. So same concept as with my numbers. I can have just arrays of values.
Do we need a comment on each of the objects, or just between like a 1, 0, 2?
Oh, actually, you don't need a comma here. You could have a comma here.
Oh, okay.
But PowerShell lets you define arrays. Not the last one though. That's too many.
Mm-hmm.
Lets you define arrays without commas. If you're doing them down the stack like this. If they're on a single line, you'd actually want the commas between them in this case.
So a line break essentially works like a comma.
Yeah.
You also don't need the array in parentheses if it's comma delimited.
Oh, thank you. Yes. I'll tweet something out after this. There's a Mark Krause just did an excellent write-up on line continuations, like ways to you can wrap your code in text, just like these things we were talking about. That there was even some things in there I didn't realize before I read this article. So I'll make sure I tweet that one out after the meeting. So just like before, we can access the 0 in the second one, the 0 and 2. Alright, so what is a hash table? Right, the general description is it's a data structure, and you store each value using a key. So up above, I could kind of call my index was the key, 0 through whatever, that's the length of the count. But with a hash table, you can actually use any value as your key. So I'm not limited to just numeric values. I can use strings or other sets like that. So here's bare basics, creating an empty hash table, nothing in it. Let me get my hotkeys here. Perfect. All right. So I've defined an empty hash table, and here is I suppose, the most technical way to add a value to an array, to a hash table. I'm going to walk through several ways to do this because, like anything with the computer, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So here I'm going to create a key. This key is going to use Kevin as a name, and the value will be 37. So in a way, I'm making an age list where the person's name is the key and their age is the value in this case. So when I run this set here, I'll have added this to the hash table. And when you see the output, it's done in the name value format. If I want to add the second one, same story. You can call add multiple times. And then we run our hash table again. We see both items on the list. As we can call one out individually. Say I just want this one back, and I'll get the value of 37 out. Now, that's very archaic, I think. Like they've added some better ways to access these values. So if I actually use the same bracket accessor to pull out a value, I can say, what's his age? For my age, 37. My son Alex, I ask the age for him. I get 9 back. Let's continue down. We can also create values and add them to the hash table using that same notation. So I don't have to use those methods of add like I did before. I can create a new empty one, and then just by using a value in the index, the accessor, in the brackets, I can place any value in there that I want. So same one here for Alex. See the same story over. Okay, so we kind of move, and then we're going to pre-populate a hash table. Right, like here, before I was creating empty hash tables, but here's one where I actually create all the values right up front. Right, you have this like key value pair in defining our hash table. So just like before, values in there. If we go now. So far, I've just done keys values of similar types, right? Everything in my hash table was an age. But actually, we're still gonna, but we can also use these as just like lookup tables. So here's something where I want to map, let's say, environments to servers. So if I have a value like this, and elsewhere in my code, I can define like a parameter or a variable of the environment QA, and then I can actually reach into that hash table and pull out just that server. There's one way to do like lookups in your code, reference list values from a list that way without iterating over the list. If you want to walk a hash table, let me load up my values again. Nope. Alright, so here's my sample hash table. If I want to do a measure object, tell me how many there are, you'll find the measure object actually sees it as a single actually sees a hash table as a single item. But it does allow you to do a count on it to know how many values are in there. So in this case I've got 2. If I want to list my values, we've got the values property. And if I actually want my keys, you can access just those as well. Those the varying ways to pull data in and out of the hash tables. Now, iterating, right? We want to walk the whole collection and pull values out and do something with them. So here's one where I'm grabbing the keys, and we're basically going to for each over it. And the first item, I'm just going to take the key value and shove it in the string. And then here I'm going to look up the key in the hash table to pull the value out. If you haven't, those new to PowerShell, this formatting operator allows me to take values past it, like the 0 item. The 0 item will get placed in that spot, this placeholder, and then the value here will be placed in that one. So as I run this list here, it'll actually place those values in there, and I get 1 for each one of them. There are many different ways to iterate a hash table. Here's actually the same story using the for each loop. Right? This is really the same trick where I'm grabbing the keys and I'm walking it to insert the values. But there's also the get enumerator. A little bit more advanced, I guess, but it gives you an object where you can actually, for each item, you can actually pull the key and the value separately. Sometimes it's easier to think about your code one way or the other, so you kind of have the option to do either or in this case. So running our enumerator, we get our same pattern. But there are some gotchas with enumerating hash tables, in that you can't update the hash table that you're iterating over. So let's stage my data here. And here's a case where, whew. Oh, there we go. We can, so here's a case where I'm attempting to, for every item, I'm attempting to update it with this server dev 03, right? And when I execute this one, it's actually complaining because I tried to update the array that we were, with the hash table that we were walking over. Thankfully, they give you a fairly descriptive error message saying that while enumerating the collection was modified. So one way around that feels a little bit of a hack, but if you actually clone the keys, which gives you a copy of the keys themselves, and then you iterate over the keys, the copy of the keys, and use them to reference your initial hash table, you can actually get your modification in there. So in this case, we were successful. I'll actually just see what was in our environments. We'll see that I've overwritten everything that was in there because I was able to grab that from the keys. hash tables as collections of properties. So far, it's kind of sort of this where everything we've done up until this point has really been like the value, the keys and the value are the same data type, right? Where in this case, every value is an age, no matter what the key is. I'm just assuming the value type is of the same thing. There's a second way to look at a hash table, because it is just key value pairs. Your values can really be quite a bit different, and you can treat something more like an object holding information. So here's an example where I now have a name, which is Kevin, and an age, which is 37. The values themselves are different. I suppose you could look at the keys more as properties that contain their own values that are not necessarily related to each other. This will allow you to actually build up and make more complex objects quite easily. And we can also then start adding properties kind of on the fly, just like we could add properties before. Actually, let's not order here. Let's do this. All right, so in this case here, right, I've got a key of the name city. I can insert these in here, just like we were earlier. And with that, nope, that's just that way. The whole we now have all of these keys and values stored in that one object, in that one hash table. And anyway, so before I step past this lets you treat hash tables quite a bit like objects. Sometimes you can drop them into their place. Not always. Like there's many places where you'll lift one an object, and I'll show you a method actually did not show and why that matters. But this is just a very handy way to treat a hash table as a collection like this in your code. If you would like to check to see if there's a key or value there, you could. I feel like I'm doing something out of order here, but I didn't. Yeah, cover documentation yet. So, like in this case here, I'm, getting the value of age. If something's there, it'll be true. If not, it'll be false. But the gotcha to be aware of, if you're doing accessing like this, is if the age is 0, is this handling age the way you want it to be handled? Like sometimes when you're dynamically accessing stuff, you might want to actually be more explicit and check for null, because in the case that we have here, we don't know what to expect if there's nothing there. Now, while this might be more, when you're looking at an age, what has to happen, but you could be walking over a list of something, and this could actually be like a variable that comes in, and all of a sudden, is null what you're looking for? Does the key existing having null actually mean something, right? So you can actually ask the hash table itself if it contains a key. This way, it might be there and it's null, and if that's the case you want, UC will handle it correctly. So there's a couple different permutations here of testing your values and getting your validation logic kind of in place to all these things. Now, remove keys. So just as you can add them in very simply, we can also remove them from your object. Maybe you're doing something where you're building up a lot of data to create like a report, and at the end you just want to purge those keys out. You can easily remove them from your list of values. Clearing all the keys out, sometimes it's just as easily to assign it to a new empty hash table, but there's also a clear operator covering that exact same thing. And since I think there is, I didn't cover dot notation. I swore I had a section in here on that, so I may as well just.
I think you passed over it.
Did I pass over it?
It is up where you first started talking about objects down a bit.
did jump over it. Sorry, I thought, yeah. Jump right over the example, I suppose I was getting myself out of place here. So, well, I had just shown that we could do the bracket notation. We could actually do property-based accessors as well. So this here is the equivalent. This is why you saw me changing all my examples later on, because I thought I just had stuff out of order. Is the equivalent, ooh, that's wrong there, of doing something more like this. Actually, so, yeah, so these are equivalent. So where we're using this bracket to access our value here, using this dot notation, you can actually access the keys directly. And as I was saying, you can treat this thing like an object. This makes it feel even that much more real as if it was an object. Quite often, I'll see this notation used more when, like, say, like my personal preference might be that if I'm doing properties, I might do like the dot notation. Like this here, I probably would have redone these. I actually had these as dot notation, didn't I? I might treat these more as a dot notation because I'm seeing those different properties. But personally, if sometimes when I'm having a collection of the same thing, I would, like I would in my age list, I might be more likely to say, yeah, look up this person and give me their value. Personal preference, you can mix and match these things however you want. And that's kind of the very bare basics of hash tables. So at this point, any questions over the stuff I covered so far? Yes.
Total new question. So
Sure.
I'm trying to figure out the difference between when you would use a single quotation versus double quotation, and then what about the case that you want a stable quotation?
Oh, perfect. So those examples there, let me pull up variable substitution. So the single quote versus the double quote is where when you're using a single quote, none of the variables inside it gets resolved.
So it's known as a string literal.
String literal. So
It's
we
not
have,
interpreted.
thank you, it's literally the string that you want. If you actually want to place, there's my example. Place a variable inside your string and get that to resolve to the value of the variable, you use the double quotes.
Okay.
So that's where if I put a single quote here, I'd actually get $1 first, $1 last.
Okay.
The double quote, I'd probably have either nulls in here because I haven't defined it, I would actually get the first and last name. If you want to explore this more, actually this post I pulled up is actually off my blog, which I'll also tweet out after this, that actually dive in quite nicely the very different ways you can do variable substitutions for commands. I kind of walk the whole gambit of substituting values in strings, including like the format string that we just kind of glossed over a little bit. So this one actually touches right to the heart of your questions, and it kind of takes all the way to the deepest end. Here's the index of that list, kind of covering the various things of string builders, join paths, replacements. Yeah. Any other questions?
Just had a quick question.
Yes.
In this part here, are the objects already defined when you're calling, or you're setting the values to them? Or?
You know, I'm kind of creating the object right here. This is my trick to actually create an empty hash table.
Right.
If I were to...
And so the Kevin and Alex, that's creating them there and then setting the values.
Yes, it is. It does all in the same way. Let's see if I actually don't define something. I don't know what's going to happen here.
It's not defined yet.
Not defined yet. If I had mistakenly done something like this, you can get away with that, like assigning it to just a magic variable. But that notation we're getting into is something it's expecting something to already be there.
Can you, with a variable that hasn't been made yet, can you cast it as a hash table and then do a dot equal something? What would that interpret it? You kind of help PowerShell along.
It would still be null. PowerShell treats undefined variables as null. So you'd have a null hash table, of type hash table, but it would be null. So it would fail.
Yeah,
I agree.
sounds right.
So a hash table is actually an object. And that's kind of what it comes down to, is if I take this one here that I defined, let's get this, and we do a get member on this, get member, it'll tell me there's a type of system.collections.hashtable. Generally, when you're working with an object, it's got to be defined or initiated first. There's some value types, like the strings and integers, something like that, you can just kind of assign them to a null and just run with them. But yeah, that's kind of the nuance there. All right. So.
PS item I saw.
Oh yeah, I should touch on that. $PS item is actually equivalent to the $_. I try to remember to actually spell that out. It's one of those personal preference things. I think me on the command line, on the pipeline, I'll do this, but they are interchangeable 100%. Actually, this is an alias for the $PS item.
So what is it? So what's the PS item? Is that some kind of arbitrary variable?
It is. So when you pass something over the pipeline, the current item would be like the PS item or this thing here. So when this thing here went through, it multiplied each one by 2, and this stood in for whatever the variable came across.
I think that's called the pipeline variable, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
It's often referred to as that. I think it is mostly only in like implicit loops, right? So when you do like a where each or where object, there's an implicit loop there where it iterates each one, and then the $_ refers to the iterable.
So it's kind of like the equivalent of this if you're working with for each loops, where it's a this in that, but that's all kind of implied on this pipeline for you already. So these two are darn near. For the purpose of this conversation, they're equivalent. All right. So features.
Where would we use this?
What?
The $_.
No, the hash table.
Everywhere.
Well, let me, you know what? Let me do a little bit here on performance, and I think it'll jump out at you at least one of the key use cases of why you want to use it. But actually, I tweaked that. So talking about performance, or what you want to do. One is something you actually just want to start collecting data together and do something with it later, right? Like if you have lots of variables, sometimes it's easier to have them in a collection that you can assign values to and do something. But when it comes to performance, one of the key definitions of the hash table is that when you use the index or the key, it's almost like a single operation to get the value out of it. It actually does a hash behind the scenes to know exactly where your value is every time. Whereas if you have an array of your objects, you kind of got to walk the array to find the object you want. And if you know the index, beautiful, but sometimes you don't know the index of the object, right? So if you got to walk a list, you got to take a performance hit of walking the entire thing. But if you actually come up with a key like the name of the object and identifier and store it away, the retrieval of that is super fast. It's linear. It's almost a linear operation versus a exponential type operation.
Constant.
Constant.
Amortized constant.
Thank you.
That's why we're
Sorry,
running
Dev here.
Yeah, I just use the things. I don't know what they're called.
In the database, you just can think about that's a table in the SQL database,
I'm gonna
right?
start a
One
list of
hash
all-
table, just a simple database. It's a table, right? Just a table.
I'm going to start a list of all of his developerisms. So first we got string literal, and now we got
Constant amortized.
constant amortized time. Yeah.
No, appreciate it. Makes me a better presenter. So, I got performance in here somewhere, or I should do some actual numbers on this. But I think I got a couple more basics on here that I'll walk through to get to that. But another detail with that being a hash table is using a hash to store stuff. It's not ordered. So it's actually putting stuff in the hash table at its own order that generally you're gonna keep like, look, if you don't care. But sometimes you do, right? Like there's times you actually want to store stuff in and actually have it in the order you define it. And that's where an ordered hash table, which is actually just done by using this type accelerator, what they call that, to say make this when you're ordered. So no matter, you know, what alphabetical order this gets entered in, it will stay and preserve that order when you enumerate it. Another example where the keys stay exactly how I define them. If I drop this off, it's anybody's guess what order they'll actually come out in. So, some other order. That's the order they're in, is some other order. Not alphabetical. Alright, so, talking about stuff you can do inline or not. If you actually need to define your hash table inline, it's actually the semicolon that allows you to put everything on a single line. In my scripts, I like to break stuff out like you've been seeing them in here, but when I'm on the console, I just bang away commands. I mean, I'll do this all day long. Probably the most common place you see this done is when people are using like a select object and they want a custom property to come out on the output. So let me grab just some values here. What have we got here? So I'm going to grab the PS drives just to have something that's got some use space on it. If I list my drives, I get this output. But if I want to know, actually, what am I trying to think? Oh, yeah. So this tells me beautifully my use and my free space, but it doesn't actually tell me the total space of the drive in this case, right? So when I run this line, I'm going to scroll over so you can see all of it, but it will do the calculation. So here we're doing this complicated expression where we're basically saying, hey, here's the name of it, this is the expression that we're going to run for every item, and here's doing the current item, just like that PS item we were talking about, the use space plus the free space divided by when gigabyte.
It's cute, I've never seen that before. I didn't know you could use gigabyte notation.
Kilobyte, I think it goes down to the byte.
Yeah, so that's one of those, there's a whole selection of them.
Yeah.
I see this all the time when I'm Googling for results on stuff like this, is but I could do this stuff inline. And that's actually short notation for, let me expand this out for you, where that N is actually the name, and E is the expression. So if they're trying to shove stuff in one line, they'll take shortcuts like that, so that you can't actually see what it means. So here's what we're saying is, let's make up a property, we'll call it this, and here's the expression to run for the output. And I can run that same thing, if I want to do it this way, just like that.
So select object is basically inserting a script property there temporarily.
It pretty much is.
Okay.
Now, there is. Sure. Yes. Go ahead.
Now, would you have to label a name expression?
What was that?
Would you have to label a name expression?
You do have to use name. I think there's one more
I
value.
think as long as it can resolve down to N or E it works. I know N and E works for sure, name expression works for sure. I think some portion of name or some portion of expression would potentially also work.
Yeah, I believe so. There's also, I think,
This is unique to select object, right? Like
select,
it's just something it
I think it's
takes
script
on.
property, isn't it?
select object, format table. There's a couple of those that
Okay.
where you accept a property. I think you can put a hash table in there with these values.
Okay.
Probably even like a sort object.
Yes.
We could do it there as well. You're making code really ugly fast, but if you need to, do that calculation there, you can. I think my preference actually would be more to create a hash table on the fly and return that, or if it's custom object and return that.
Yeah.
So here I'm we're making select object do all the work, but we could just say, coding in a demo, drives, then for each object. Alright, so within my for each object, I can actually create a hash table on the fly for each one of those. I could do name equals name. This is the name from here. And I could do total space in gigabytes equals this here. So this is probably very close to what I would do. I'm going to cover creating custom objects here in a second, which basically would prefix this with something else. Actually call this a PS custom object, and I run this, I should get that same output. I don't know why I think this is easier and prettier to look at than the select object and those custom properties there, but this is the design pattern, I guess, that I go down if I need to do something like that. Splatting. Okay, so learning about hash tables, this is one of the most first shocking things. Oh, you can do that, right? So let's say we got this command that has all of these properties. You kind of got to scroll all the way to the end to really understand what's happening. My personal preference, having written quite a bit of code, is that I don't want to scroll right to left, ever. So when I can, I wrap stuff to the left so that I can see it, more vertically. One way to do it is to escape stuff so that you're using backticks, and I'm not going to show them because I hate them so much. Or take all those properties and you put them in a hash table. So these are all the exact properties, same names and same values. And then you can splat them, and they call us, in this case, the splatting operator. They'll actually match all of these up with the properties of this command to then execute it. So it's easy to clean your code up so you can actually see right on the screen what's actually happening for this command below. My code is littered with these splat hash tables.
The beauty of that too is that oftentimes you'll have an if statement where maybe you know your IP address or something, and so in that if statement you call the command and you pass the IP address. And then you have your else statement where you don't pass the IP address, and then maybe you have another if else for whether or not you know something else. With splatting, you call the command once, and in your if statement it's just adding one more property to the hash.
Yeah.
Which A, makes your script much more readable, and B, reduces a vast amount of duplicated code.
Yeah, so something like that, you can build this hash table through your script with all the parameters you want to run on this command, versus having lots of if, else, switch statements, and having this command in every one of those with just different options. That's the pattern you see is 5 or 6 if statements, add HTTP server for scope in every one of them with just different parameters, right? But now you have the flexibility of just changing your hash table in those, and at the end, splat it and execute it once. Most commonly, I really like this for optional values. So, here's a case where I might be doing some WMI stuff, right? So, it's very common for me to have the class name and the computer name, and maybe this is inside of a function or script where I'm passing stuff into it. I don't always have a credential. In fact, I only add a credential when I need it. And here's a case where I'm optionally deciding if there's something in this credential, let's actually add the credential object to this hash table, and then we can splat it. So here's almost that example you're referring to where I would have somebody have, in the if statement, we call this command with credential, and the else statement call the command without the credential. I use this pattern actually quite often for optional values. You can add hash tables together. It's kind of crazy. Like you can actually say this hash table plus this other hash table. The catch is they can't actually have any overlapping keys. But this person we've been looking at all along, just now has a zip and or multiple.
So if you rerun it, it'll fail now, because it already has zip in it, right?
Yes.
What happens if you add an ordered hash table to an unordered one?
I have no idea. I haven't done that test yet. So that's something I try, and I will probably try that later, I'm sure. I do a lot of experimental, like as I'm studying stuff, I try all the permutations. Like I see an idea that might work, a discussion topic. Once I go do it myself, it kind of cements into my own mind of how these things work in order. Okay, now nested hash tables. So you can actually put a hash table inside your hash table.
Hash table inception.
Inception, exactly. Yeah. So like here's an example where if I'm treating this like an object properties, I might want to have a grouping on location. So let me pre-stage this guy. So right here, I'm adding a property, location, and I'm creating him as an empty hash table so that I can actually do my location.city and my location.state. That's kind of a way to organize your object.
And this goes back to your question of when you would use hash tables. This makes it very easy to organize your data in a way that's user usable.
So any questions on the stuff we kind of covered so far? I know we're kind of like, we're jumping around like a little bit deeper, kind of as we go. So.
But the one thing with hash tables too, though, it's all in memory, right?
Yes, it is all memory.
Right. So the more, like you were talking about, you can actually combine hash tables. I'm going, well, then that would be, I can see the memory going up, to begin to, as the amount of members increase, as and that sort of thing. More of those you begin to use.
Yeah.
Same as an array, though. Same as an array or a list.
I'll come back to it, but there are. Yeah, actually, I got some things to touch on this a little bit.
Okay.
We'll start talking about like copies of arrays. That gets kind of fun.
Okay.
So back to our same example. Here's how I define that same array inline, where I actually say the property is a hash table. So you can actually define pretty complex objects this way. This would be great for like configuration data for something quite often. If you're starting to dive down the DSE path, like the config data is a hash table of hash tables, and you store stuff like this you want to pass to it.
You might notice that it's starting to look a lot like JSON.
It does look a lot like JSON. In fact, the pattern is you tend to go down this path. Your hash tables get really complicated, and then you start saving it as JSON and importing it. Right? That's kind of like one of those building blocks towards, some other giant monstrosity. And then, like I said, we do the documentation to access the full stuff right back out of it. And if I actually access just location, it'll actually give me all the values of that hash table. So you can hit them individually. More nesting. Okay, so back to your earlier example, I can have a hash table of people that have hash table for their properties. So this is that case where my key, every key is a person that has a hash table. Like that's that pattern of this key gives me the same type of object all the time. And in this case, my object has properties on it. If we wanted to load this guy, we can then access them using any of these permutations. Like I was saying, just pure dot notation. I can get the value out, or I can use pure like the braces, the accessors, to pull values out. This is a scenario I'm saying it's personal preference. You would probably see me do something more like this, because I see these here as the keys of a similar type, or these are properties of that object. But that's all the many ways we can do this.
But your keys are unique, right?
Yes, keys are unique.
I mean, that's just a common name.
These are all unique keys. Like if I call somebody else Alex, I'm overwriting this Alex's data with Alex's data.
Well, that's why you have Alex too.
You can get around that by making the value in your hash table an array though, and then you can add another Alex to your Alex key.
Can you
Yeah.
put other programs or functions, like maybe PowerShell commands as values in hash tables?
Script blocks are objects. So.
Okay,
PowerShell's
script
very
blocks.
good
You still have to know there's a script to execute it, but with that said, as I'm defining here, I got something here that says, just like, we'll change this. Birthday. I'm lazy, so I'll do day, and I think that's valid.
Wait, yes it was.
But that's going to evaluate as you put it in the hash table.
You're right. It should do this at
So
execution time.
you can just put that in curly braces though, right? To have it execute.
Does invoke expression take a string or a script block?
You can pass it a script block.
Um,
I could be totally wrong.
So, kind of your point, like, this will run when I initiate the array, or when I initiate the hash table, right? So, it'll only call get date once. If you want something that will execute a script every time somebody accesses that, at least for hash tables, it's going to be custom logic that does that.
Okay.
If you're actually using true objects, there's such thing as a script property. You can actually say this property is a script. Then every time you can access that property, you actually get it to execute.
Okay. Yeah, if like I was populating one of these tables with, personal information from like web scraping using like small Python scripts.
Okay.
That's why I had asked if you could make like the hash table with those just short PowerShell commands.
Yeah, so if
And
you've
then
got your commands there, you can,
copying them with the populated information from, I guess, wherever you're extracting from.
yeah, so as soon as I execute this, that value will be executed, and then as I move this hash table around, that birth date will go with that hash table.
Okay.
Page city, walking the list. Did I do this? So, walking the list. I already did enumeration, didn't I? I don't want to do this the second time. But I'm going to do this again because I skipped something last time. It goes to me late, I'm dead. So here's a case where I'm going to walk every name that. Oh, I think this is just showing that it said that more complicated hash table. And that actually broke my complicated hash table. Let's get an H back in here. That works. Page. Alright, so let's run that. Perfect. So I think what I was showing here is I can walk the list of keys, and I can actually pull the person out from the root level keys by name. And I actually have a person here where I can actually do the person.age, the person.city to actually enumerate the list and get all the subproperties. So you can process as deep as you need to get the values back out. Looking at it as a hash table. So the problem is, well, one of the problems, when you nest stuff in a hash table and you call it back out, you kind of lose visibility at the shell what's in there, right? You actually got to go down and say, well, I want to know, dot Kevin, what his stuff is, and you almost have to like walk the tree to see individual values. The way I tend to get around that is I convert to JSON. That way I can see, like I've got an object, right? I've done stuff with it, but I want to see what's in there, like debugging just that visibility. This is probably one of my better ways to see what the contents of it are. There's also a format custom, which I think is, personally I don't like. but going down. Also has a very weird syntax to it, and I fetched for hash tables. I can see it back later. Then never mind. Figured I said that one. That works for some objects better than JSON, but not hash tables. Okay. So now you can see the structure of it, and if we were making any changes, we can see it. Now, I alluded to we can create objects this way. So our current, when we don't create an object, you saw like the name and the values before. Is the person still valid? So before I create an object here, right, you have this, the name is your key, and the value is the value that's in there. But if we actually cast it as an object, or create an object out of it, we get more of a columnar type look to it. In fact, this is probably the most common reasons people will take a hash table and cast it to an object, so it looks pretty on their output. Yeah, if your code may not matter, but whoever you're presenting it to, you can also create the hash table first and then cast it as an object. So you don't have to worry about doing an object at the same time. You can actually create it later. And one of the common reasons I do this is so that I could save it to a CSV in more of that Commler format. Granted, going to a CSV only really works when you only have like a single depth to your hash table. When you're doing nested hash tables, that's when you're probably going to save it out to JSON. If you pull it back in from that JSON, it's actually going to give it to you as an object and not as a hash table, which is kind of a weird nuance. If you truly need it to come in and out as a hash table, the export CLI XML will do it. The caveat there is it's not human readable on the disk, right? Or JSON, you can actually look at it. I do have this hack from the web on how to convert JSON to a hash table. I'll have this posted on the repo if you want this there, but I found some assembly that actually has a function that will serialize it to a hash table. It's got its own caveats, like it can't be a hash table or an array of hash tables or array of JSON, but that's, if you're going down this path, there's more lessons for you to learn. If you did save the hash, if you have a hash table saved in a file as actual PowerShell hash table, you can read it from disk and execute it to create it back into a variable. I know one of those, if you're going on this path, here's a snippet for you, but I kind of avoid this one as well. No, I do want to say, and keys are just strings. Like, if you have spaces in them or special characters, if you just put single quotes around them, those are valid keys when you're defining a hash table. And yeah, so these are all valid ways. Oh, but the weird one is, like I found this was the weirdest one when I first discovered it, is you can actually do strings for your property names using your .property accessors. Kind of weird to me, but it works. And oh yeah, and you can use group object to give you a hash table. This is one of those fun discoveries too, where normally if you get child item, you have like an array of all of these objects. And you have this pattern where you have multiple objects that you'd much rather have them in an array with a certain key. Like in this case, I want my name to be the key. I run get child item group object as hash table property name. I get back a hash table where each value is actually the object that was in there. So there's some fun hacks there of actually taking a CSV, for instance, shoving it into a hash table with a key, so you can do lookups into it. What?
I said, how long have you been holding on to that one? I've never seen that one before.
Oh.
Is that on your blog? Have you written about that?
I think it is.
That's super neat. I've not seen that one.
It might not be, now you say that, but
It's not all good, that's the article.
it's not my article. Okay. So fresh content right here, guys. I got something tonight. That's impressive. Yeah, so just like a hash table, you can pull properties off of it. And okay. Anything that we loop back on? I think I got a little performance stuff in this next one, I hope, unless I completely deleted it. And it's a couple fun objects. So let's do. Yeah, here it was. I just moved it to the wrong file. Okay, so one of the reasons why using hashtables is quite often performance. So here's an example where I have 1,000 servers that have a site feed. I'm generating this data on the fly. They could be pulling this from AD, JSON, CSVs. So in this case, let's say we have 1,000 servers, the various names. The data is, there's a site ID of 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Right? It's like, to us, we don't know what it is, but we have a lookup table or an array that might tell us what it is, right? So I'm going to create an object, or an array here of lookups. So I'm going to start with like this. I'm using JSON here, but this could be, again, a CSV or some other data structure that holds key value pair or data.
Could be straight from the SQL table.
Straight from the SQL table even, yeah. So here, let's say I got the SQL table that has name ID, and I want to do that lookup. Like, I want to know where my servers are. Like, whoever designed that system, like, putting an ID in there is insane. So let's say we walk the list, right? We walk the list of servers. I'll create a hash table for each one. So I'll have my server name is one property, and the location. Well, I need to. That's invalid, is it? No, that's right. I need. Oh, sorry, I didn't test these demos.
Here are you testing non-hash table?
Hold on. I'm pretty sure I want this guy. So I want to take this array and enumerate it, or the ID from that array. So I'm going to walk this array effectively, pull the ID where it matches the site ID and get the name. So if I, yeah, no, it's kind of make your head shake one. let's look at this so you can see what I'm actually trying to produce, right? Yes, US object. I want to see my output. This is what we're trying to produce. Is a list of servers that have their locations, right? And I'm saying my source data doesn't have it. Somebody gave me a bunch of numbers. And I got a bunch of locations. And we need to merge these two. So that's kind of what this is going to demo here. So I'm basically going to walk the lookup list of locations where the ID matches the server ID, there's a name of it, and put in the location. So when we run this guy, I'm going to drop him off just to have performance numbers, which runs in 242 seconds. I have one here might be a little bit easier to wrap your head around, where we actually do the for each, where we have one array walking the other array, where the site ID matches the other ID. We'll just pull the name from location and the name from the server, and here's our object.
So your if statement needs to be -eq.
You're right, thank you.
That one doesn't count.
Let's see if this has my performance. 51 seconds. I'll try that twice just to see. 7, so get an average. Alright, 40 something seconds. So it does the same output as the previous one. Now, let's change gears and actually do a lookup to a hash table. So here a hash table has these values. And now, I think our for each loop actually looks the easiest of all of them. Right? Now I'm saying the site ID in this lookup gives me the values I wanted. And when we run this one, please be faster. 40 seconds. And, oh no, I need to run a little bit more than that. I gotta can't look up into an empty hash table.
Trophy.
What was that? 0.01 seconds? So, orders of magnitude faster by using that, by looking up into the hash table, right? And my point there is, that array wasn't that big, right? I've only got like that many items in it. What's that, 6? 5 or 6? In that array. And just me walking my large list and my small list was an order of magnitude slower than me just having a hash table doing the same thing, or just pulling that value really, really quick. So like, even that tiny array was an order of magnitude slower than just doing a quick hash table lookup. So I know maybe a lot of complicated stuff in there, but the point I wanted to drive home was that if you're just looking up a value, one, this is very, very clean to look at. I think even you guys are newer to it, can follow this easier than my previous two examples, where I was walking an array and walking an array. This might be too deep, but in fact, I'm going to jump. There's a gotcha here when you're copying hash table around, in that they don't copy like you think they should. So when you have value types, when you set a value, you set something equal to that value, you set new value, they actually change like you think they would, right? My copy has 2, my origin has 1. There's this weird thing with hash tables where when you make that assignment, they're actually the same hash table. So when you modify one, you're actually modifying both of them. So these guys here now, the same hash table, and copy.name actually modifies the original. Some of those gotchas to be aware of when trying to copy hash tables around. I'm going to jump over some of these to a couple special hash tables before we call it a night here. So TS-bound parameters, kind of those advanced ones, but when you are passing in parameters, the TS-bound parameters is the list of properties that are used in the function, in the command line. So if you have lots of properties, you can actually use this TS-bound parameters to know what values they pass in or not. And the real value in this is that if they didn't pass a value in there, it won't be in the TS-bound parameters. So if I have a default value on first, and they skip over it, my first will not have a null value because there's a value there. But my TS-bound parameters will be null because they didn't pass that in. So that's one way to tell if somebody actually used a parameter versus the default value just showing up in there.
So is that just another way of doing an input validation as opposed to, because you usually do like the parameter validation.
Yeah, like sometimes you want to know. I guess switch might be a good one, right? If a switch is there, if there's no switch, it's generally false. If I say dash switch is true, if I do dash switch : false, I get false again. If I want to know do they actually pass in a value or not, I can use that. It's going to depend on your use case and your needs, and it's kind of one of those corner cases. But the reason why you need to know that is not so much for parameter validation, which that's kind of maybe what this one is demonstrating here. But if you're doing a proxy function, where you might be one to pass, like splat, the TS-bound parameters to a subfunction, if they didn't pass it in, it won't get splatted, even if you put a default value in there. And that's the actual gotcha I really want to point out was, even your default values won't get splatted to proxy functions. And another fun one, actually even for you guys, this default parameter values, is a way to globally within your session define your own default values for somebody else's commandlets and parameters. So like here's one I have in my profile. Whenever I do connect to BI server for vCenter server, in my profile, I specify it as some server. So at the shell, I say connect via server. I don't specify anything because I've kind of pre-populated those default values. The file encoding is another one I'll often do. And then it also supports wildcards. So if I want to, for some reason, have verbose always set on my get commandlets, or pass in a credential for all credential-based commandlets, here's one way to go about doing that. And like I said, it's per session.
You must put in your profile.
Just for your profile, yeah.
The syntax of the PSD vault parameter, is that just a hash table?
It is just a hash table, yeah.
Okay. Where does the function name colon parameter name, how is that?
So it's, I suppose that's the convention they use, I guess. So when they define this, that's what they said is they're matching against the function name. I don't think it does aliases.
Oh, can you do wildcards against any hash table when you reference a key?
No, this is basically the value of star. When they walk this hash table, they'll use this information somewhere else downstream. So it being a star means nothing for the hash table itself, other than that's the value that it means in that case.
So really quick, so right next to a connect API server, the colon server is a expected parameter, correct? Or
Yeah. So server is the parameter on the function.
Got it.
Just like alpha has the encoding or the
Right.
verbose. Yeah, you have to have both of them there or it won't truly be able to match anything. Even if you just did colon star. Actually, that wouldn't make any sense, but I think you at least need something with the property. I think you can wildcard the properties. So if it was credential something credential, I think you could do this as well, because some things like to prefix some parameters, but
so you can do like confirm false or something as a
yes.
default value.
Yeah. This is one of my favorite gems that a lot of people don't realize is that you can regex, when you do a regex, like a map, so okay, I've got a message that has some values in it, I want to do a regular expression against it, right? If I do a dash match, it'll actually give me true or false on this pattern. I kind of got a simple pattern that's very greedy. Basically says, give me anything that's between a space and this period, right? That's a very greedy way of grabbing that value. But I got a true here. The magic is there's this automatic hash table called matches. It'll actually put the values that were matched, my main expression and my sub-expression, in that table. So if you do this, my common pattern is I do if, right? And then inside the if, I use the matches to do something with it. So that's one way to just grab a value, pull it out, and do something. Now, it gets even more fun than this, or as exciting as this can be. You can do named matches, and the named match shows up on your hash table. So in this case here, I'm doing this naming of the regex subpattern. I'm calling it SSN. I can do a .ssn on it to pull that value directly out of it.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
That's one of my favorite gems a lot of people don't realize, and you can do multiple matches as well. So don't worry, that's not my valid social security number. But
Are you sure that's not your shit?
but I can do match that name, match this SSN, and yeah, so that's the beauty of that command.
Yeah, that's way better than typing it to select string with and then doing a forward lookup into this. I guess you could still do some numeric validation on the social security number, but
okay,
I didn't know that.
I covered a lot of ground really fast. I dove really deep on some of these things. So with that said, this does parallel quite closely to my blog posts. I'm going to go back to my blog quite often. But I do a lot of these fundamental articles and topics. So at kevinmarquette.github.io, I actually have a post out here on hash tables where I kind of do the same, very similar walk I might slow down a bit in some areas, I might have just more words on these same topics. So if you found something you want to get a little bit closer of a dive in onto, I do have content out here on my blog that kind of fill in the gaps if we skimmed over something too fast. And I will try to get these examples posted up on that afterwards. So that's what I got for Hashtables.
Thanks for sharing.
Yeah, I think that's my first time presenting that talk, so I have no idea my timing. I might have been a little bit long on some spots, but I think I can work with that.
It's everything I ever wanted to know about hashtables and more.
Thank you.
Do you have the file anywhere? The 2 files?
I'm going to, I'll upload to GitHub and I'll post it to the group.
Okay.
In fact, all the links I talked about, I'll make sure I get a post something up and I'll share that to everybody who's on the meetup page. If let's say you found this valuable, please join us again next month. Dave, we're going to be talking on.
Yeah, we're doing a class for PowerShell scaffolding. If you have a lot of modules or templates that you need to create real quickly, it'll be a tool for that.
Okay. Yeah. Please, our meetup, I think our sponsor will give us pizza based off of who signed up on meetup. And the health of these groups are like the people that want to come join us, and we try to be welcome to all skill levels, and I try to find content over the long haul that kind of reaches the whole gambit. And I think as this group grows, we'll always have new, fresh faces that are just getting started with PowerShell, and we'll have some more seasoned people that have been just doing it for a long time. I've been in many groups, and that's kind of the dynamic. We'll always have that. So thank you for coming, everybody. And if we want to hang out and talk a little bit on things, feel free. But I think that's kind of what we got for the group. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I've been waiting for that on.
Yeah, no, I've needed to do that so much. Like, I learned 2 things tonight. It's amazing.
For me, the 2 things are
Thank you.
anything performance related. Right? Is
Take pizza.
big driver of hashtables, and then Splatting is the other. Is it using it to represent your parameters, like
Yeah.
pass